Hello and welcome to Views and Reviews. In this episode, we'll be discussing racism in women's football. I'm delighted to say joining me today is a former England international who won 71 caps for her country and is currently playing for Aston Villa in the FA Women's Super League, Anita Asante. Welcome, Anita. How are you?
Thank you, Connor. I'm very well, thank you.
Good. Firstly, I'd like to talk a bit about Aston Villa. I know it was a bit difficult start to the season for you. Another loss yesterday. What did you think about the result?
Yeah, of course, as professional athletes, you go into every game with the mindset that you want to win. But we have a lot of positives to take from the recent weeks in terms of performances and improvements that we have made along the way that we are confident will put us into better position once we meet some other teams and, get the outcomes that we're really working hard for. But every single game is a learning curve, gives us more experience as a team and gives us better knowledge about how we are evolving in our mentality and also our adaptability as the season goes on.
Obviously, it was against your former team, Chelsea, as well. Was it nice to see some former players and managers and stuff like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I had an amazing 3 years there. The support I had at the club was second to none, from players through to staff. So, of course, I have a great relationship with lots of people there. And it's always a nice experience to go back to your old club and get such a lovely welcome, which, I got from many of them. So yeah, it's come full circle, but that's football. It's all about not, relationships you build along the way. And I'm very grateful for the way the club has impacted me as a player and also my career.
Definitely. And of course, there was a new deal for the Women's Super League as well. Are you excited about that? What are your feelings about that?
Yeah, it's another sort of great milestone and landmark deal for the women's game, which I think hopefully will propel it again forwards to a wider audience, better accessibility and viewership for the game, and opportunities. I think it's going to allow for working opportunities across the game in different levels. So that's exciting. And it's exciting to get the recognition, I think, as players to that people actually get to watch us play. I think it's going to motivate the clubs and the interest further, and hopefully also young players who are aspiring to be professional footballers to see, just what they can aspire to and achieve in the future.
So lots of reasons to be positive about the game, but unfortunately, sadly, we are still seeing cases of racism in the game. Um, I wanted to start, if it's okay, with your experience of racism and how you dealt with it.
Yeah, on a personal level, I've been fortunate, I guess, if I can use that word, to have not experienced direct racism on the pitch or off the pitch, as in regards to teammates or staff members or anything like that. Um, the times I've encountered it has largely been social media, in your DM or something like that. And this is a long time ago for me personally. But of course, there's a lot of discussion around it at the moment because there are more and more cases coming across the game on and off the pitch of abuse. And I think it's a worrying sign of where, the game is going in terms of discrimination and how we need to try to, um, you know, put interventions to stop it, really.
Do you think football authorities and social media companies are doing enough to stop racism? So I know, obviously, last month the FA put a statement out after Lauren James and Axel Tuanzebe were racially abused, and they said that they implore government to act quickly and bring in the appropriate legislation. And then they sent a letter to social media companies urging them to step up and take accountability. And that was signed by the Premier League, the English Football League, the Professional Footballers Association, Kelly Simmons, the director of Women's Professional Game, the League Managers Association, Professional Game Match Officials Limited, and Kick It Out. So obviously, do you think all of them together are working together to get a good outcome?
Yeah, I think on the surface, that looks like a positive step forward. And it is, because it's the first time publicly, outwardly, there's a show of commitment or solidarity, that they want to take this further, this action further. But at the same time, I think it's about all sides attacking it, from multiple platforms, and recognizing their own responsibility to curtail these types of behavior within our game, within our sport. We have our own governance structures within football. The government is another entity of governance. Yes, they can work collaboratively, but is the game itself doing enough to stop abuse? In my opinion, no. Is the government doing enough? Maybe not. So it's really inwardly looking, retrospectively. How can our sanctions and rules or manifestos be stronger, to be more of an intervention to these types of abusive behaviors, and sort of not really just passing on responsibilities to other institutions as well? Because I think, there are very clear rules mandated on commercial things, for example, when players not wearing the correct brands for particular competitions or games, and there are fines and sanctions and things in place. And those penalties are quite costly and quite high. So I don't see why the same types of mandates can't come into areas of anti-discrimination, abuse, racial abuse, homophobia, etc.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, Twitter obviously responded by saying they wouldn't change their policy, as everyone has the right to share their voice without requiring a government ID to do so. But they will continue to challenge, obviously, abhorrent behaviour. And Facebook, who own Instagram, said that between last year, October, they took action on 6.6 million pieces of hate speech on Instagram. Obviously, you're an ambassador for Show Racism the Red Card, which is the UK's anti-racism educational charity. What do you think football needs to do to stop discrimination? I know you mentioned it earlier, not just racism, but in other forms as well. Because I know that you've spoken openly before about being one of only a few black footballers in England who's part of the LGBT plus Q plus community. So what would you say? What would you say about that?
Basically, I think it's pertinent to any industry in society. You want to be reflective of the communities that you represent, and every club, or the game, across the game, you can look and say, are we really representative? Are we really inclusive? And what are we doing proactively to be those things? So I think that would lend some way into improving this discourse. Are we having people in volunteering through operations, through management, boardrooms, that are reflective of people across society, in gender, in sexual orientation, in religion, in all these areas? And if we're not doing that, and if we're not there yet, then clearly we still have work to do. And sometimes it's about challenging the structures we have in place, because some boardrooms aren't necessarily curtailing for the numbers, because it's been tradition. And sometimes we need to evolve that process and say, well, this is the generation we're in now, 2021. Can we evolve from the process that existed, 20 years before, which served a need then, but that need has since changed? So I think it's about looking about those areas, diversifying across the industry, because when you do that, you get different perspectives, which will also lend to different outcomes. And actually, hopefully we can progress from this conversation where we're talking about anti-discrimination, and it becomes a normal discourse of people going, I want to understand more about other cultures, or the way they interpret things, or the way we can apply policy or improve the game across the board, and see it from multiple perspectives. Because the way you would think and the way I would think might be different based on gender, for example. It would also potentially be based differently on race and background and culture. So for me, that will go a long way to improving the other parts of the game, which you could say is from fans to social media, broadcasters, etc.
So do you think that's why obviously the Black Lives Matter movement last year, I know it's Black Lives Matter started obviously a few years ago, but do you think that's why it started last year to get much bigger, because enough was enough, basically? So it was time to start change, as you just said.
Yeah, I think the Black Lives Matter movement obviously impacted everybody globally, whether you were black, brown, white, whatever. If you felt that there was some form of social injustice or a breach of human rights, I think it allowed people to look at the situation and go, you know what, we say we're evolved as a society, we live in a modern era, and this sort of thing is still going, and we thought we were so far past it, you know. So and then it's allowed us to sort of then look at it layer by layer, whether it be in your sport, whether it be in your social bubble, your workplace, and go, actually, are we inclusive? You know, are we allowing people the same opportunities? Are we allowing our own prejudices or, you know, biases to affect how effective our workforce is, you know, in things like that. And I think that's why it's had significance, because a whole generation of people have felt empowered to go, actually, this has affected me for a long time. And now I'm seeing it come to life on the, you know, a global public scale. And many are intolerant to it. You know, they don't want to live this kind of feeling with injustice. And also for the future, everyone's thinking ahead, you know, for the future, how can we make it better for others to come, so that they walk this path much easier, whether it's in the football industry or to become a doctor, a lawyer, whatever it is, that they know that they have a fair chance without sort of, discrimination.
Obviously, we mentioned earlier you used to play for England. Of the 30 players capped for England women in the 2019-20 season, only 7% were black, compared with 54% for England men in the same time period. Why do you think there is a lack of black players in the England national team? And what would you say? What would you say they should be doing to combat that issue?
Yeah, well, I think with the growth of the women's game, it's, you know, it's that most teams now have become largely embedded within their men's clubs and the structures they already have in place. So if their training grounds are located further out from inner cities, in suburban areas, I think that is one of the challenges for people from disadvantaged groups and other ethnic minority groups, to get the same level of accessibility, just because they don't necessarily populate those areas that are in rural or suburban townships. So you're losing a catchment of players potentially. So I think that's one problem, because, you know, I came through a system where there were centre of excellences when I was at Arsenal that were based in Hackney and Islington, and it was able to capture a wide net of players who could, transportation was easier. You know, the cost of traveling perhaps was easier. The support networks were easier because didn't necessarily have to rely on my parents, could go with a teammate in their family or whoever. So that's changed that social interaction dynamic of support networks as well. So I definitely think that's another issue. The other issue is, if you contextualize all of this we're talking about in terms of BLM, anti-discrimination, and all these areas that have impacted the whole game, then you have to take into consideration unconscious biases and things like that that will stop players, number one, walking through the door or that pitch or wherever it is, and also coaches maybe unconsciously not selecting them based on preconceptions on ability, you know, and their backgrounds and where they're from and how far they can reach their potentials and things like that. I don't think that can be underplayed. I think that probably could potentially be a part of it, because there aren't many coaches that are from other backgrounds either. Do you know what I mean? So if you don't have scouts or coaches or people within the structures itself that understand these nuances and the different challenges for different groups of our society, that's going to create that barrier potentially as well. So I think predominantly those are the two areas. And then the third layer could be the fact that we are seeing, or, you know, is coming more to light publicly, instances of abuse or discrimination. That also can act as a deterrent for young Black players, Black and brown players, when they see that, because they think, well, do I want to get into a profession where I can receive that kind of abuse in my work life on a daily basis? Or, you know, can I live with that? And how will that impact my mental well-being long term? Or, as a youngster coming in, I mean, it's hard enough as adults, I think, experiencing that. But imagine if you want an entry into the game, we're getting kids as early as 6, 7, 8 years old who could potentially face that kind of abuse. That's not the kind of precedent we want to set. So, and if you've got heads of, was it Greg Dyke, previous head of the EFA, saying things like, Asian people don't want to be in football because they want to be in IT or whatever. These are the types of unconscious biases that I'm referring to that already categorize what people can do based off of nothing other than a preconception. So if we can start to strip back some of this rhetoric and some of these and really analyze these structures and how we can improve them, it would go a long way, I think, to just casting a wider net, as I said, across a wider demographic of talent.
Finally, from me, it is about, you mentioned the youth earlier. What advice would you give to young players who have or are experiencing racism? Obviously, I know you said you haven't had it directly at you, but obviously you know all about it and are experienced enough to know not how to deal with it, but experienced enough of being around it, unfortunately. But what would you say to young people?
Yeah, for me, I think for young people, they should believe in their talent. If you enjoy something, you're passionate about it, then obviously I don't think you should stop based on these things that are occurring. And if they are happening, just know that it's not their fault. It's got nothing to do with them. They are not the issue. They are the victims on the end of abuse. And that they shouldn't feel afraid to challenge it. I really want them to feel empowered to speak up. That's the most important thing. If you have the courage enough or the support enough, speak up. Tell someone in your team or your coaching staff or someone you trust to get that proper support and advice. And if it is affecting your mental well-being, then it really is for everyone around that individual to recognize it as well and get them the right support, as well as stamp out the abuse if it's in and around them, but yeah, I think, and just be supportive, listen to them, listen to their experiences as well. That will go a long way to helping them, I think, feel secure in any space or environment.
Well, that was absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for your time today. I really hope the women's game continues to go from strength to strength, and good luck for the rest of the season. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Connell. It's been a pleasure.